Welcome to Lush Life, No Labels. I'm Michelle. This is a podcast where I talk about the struggles and joys of self-improvement, anywhere from relationships, career, wellness, and more. My story of the week this week is inspired by a TV show I've started watching recently called 911. It's a procedural show about a group of firefighters, 911 dispatchers, and Angela Bassett as the one police person we kind of focus on. One of the main characters in the show made a huge mistake that actually follows him for a long time. And when I started watching the show, it focuses a lot on his struggles dealing with this grave mistake. He lost his family in a fire, but the reason why there was a fire, it was because there were a lot of code violations in the apartment building that they lived in. But the fire initially started because he left a space heater on and went outside and forgot about it. So the beginning of the show is about him essentially dealing with the consequences of that mistake, how he is trying to move on with his life. That is an example of a very big mistake that was, of course, unintentional on the show. Mistakes are things that we all make, and that part of the show took a long time. So I've been thinking a lot about mistakes and what kind of mistakes we all make as people, as adults, what that does to us, and how we can deal with those. The example I just gave was a huge mistake that ended up costing a lot of people their lives. An example of another mistake is mispronouncing someone's name or accidentally wearing your shirt inside out when you're getting ready in the morning. I give that example because mistakes can range from very small to potentially very devastating. And I thought about the perception of mistakes in the world. So when someone makes a mistake, how do we perceive them? When we're younger, we make a lot of mistakes because we are learning how to be adults, we're learning to grow up, and there are a lot of things we don't know. It's very common for that to happen. And as you grow up, your parents, your guardians, anyone else, teachers are supposed to help you figure out those mistakes. You, of course, also figure them out as you grow up. For example, as children, a lot of the time, people will disobey the adults that are supposed to be guiding them because they think they know better. Especially when we're teenagers, I think that's one of those times where we think we're growing up now and our parents can't be telling us what to do like they used to. And yes, there are times like that, but sometimes we disobey them or we're in a hurry to grow up really quickly. I watched a horror movie a while back where a teenager snuck out at night and went to a party. And then there was a mass killer at the party. I think it was a movie from the 90s. But that obviously was a mistake for the teenager to sneak out. Or you're a kid and you have some markers that your parents bought you to draw, and then you end up drawing that on the wall. That's a huge mistake. In these different situations, when you make that mistake, your guardian or that trusted person may reprimand you for writing on the wall or sneaking out, but they're also supposed to teach you how not to make that mistake again. As adults, we are in charge of our own mistakes. We don't always have a parent or someone else telling us or reprimanding us for that mistake. Life reprimands us for that mistake. As children, I find that society is more lenient when you make certain mistakes because you didn't know any better. But the older you get, the expectation is that you do know better. You've had life experiences. And yes, you can still make mistakes because none of us are perfect, but there are certain mistakes that people do not expect you to make. As an adult, mistakes could be more costly than they are when you're a kid. And because you don't always have an older adult there talking to you about the mistake or making sure that you understand, you as the adult have to hold yourself accountable for the most part. Of course, if your mistake does impact your job or impacts other people in some way, they may confront you about it, but it's up to you as that adult to get through that mistake. Because we all make mistakes, it's important to reframe them as we get older. There are different mistakes that children can make that adults may not make. I want to run through a range of common mistakes that adults make, just so that we all can see that we are not the only ones making these mistakes. For example, there are a lot of silly mistakes an adult can make, such as accidentally leaving your phone or your keys in your house and now you're locked out. I've done that before. Or I saw a video online of someone who was out of dishwasher detergent and they thought that soap detergent would be a good replacement because if you wash dishes in the sink, you use dish soap. But when they started the dishwasher, it started foaming out and spilled onto the kitchen and made a complete mess. So that was a mistake of using the wrong type of soap. Mistakes we can make in our personal lives could be around miscommunication with someone that we are talking to. There can be career mistakes in terms of taking different risks on what you want to do with your career or changing careers if you feel that you could have gone in the wrong field. One big one that we probably all hear about also is financial mistakes. I've seen and heard about people putting all of their money into a house, but it turns out it's over their budget and then they become house poor or they can't keep up with the payments. Some people put all their money into a business and for whatever reason it fails. There are other financial mistakes that we can make that can impact our budgeting, saving, or long-term planning. And typically those are, of course, pretty devastating. There are also unintentional mistakes. For example, I had a situation where I suggested a resource to someone, but turns out the person that they got paired with didn't really help. And although I had good intentions, I still did make a mistake by making that pairing. Sometimes mistakes just happen, they're not always avoidable. So, what do we do when we make these mistakes? I try to think about it in terms of whether I'm in a growth versus fixed mindset when I make a mistake. It really just depends on what you're thinking in that moment and what type of mistake it is. But the way I think about a fixed mindset is where I'm viewing the mistake as a reflection of my inadequacy. I avoid taking risks to keep myself from making mistakes. Maybe I feel discouraged to keep going, or I blame others for my mistake and try to dissociate potentially. That's one type of mistake where I may not care as much about the mistake. I may not think it's my fault. This type of mindset makes it so that I don't have a desire to improve on my mistakes, that I see it as, well, it's just going to happen. It is what it is, even if I make the same mistake over and over again. So it's having a bit of an unwillingness to reframe the way that you see your mistakes. On the other side, there's the growth mindset, where if you make a mistake, whether it's a silly one or not, you see it as a learning process. You see making a mistake as an area for improvement. So you see that I made this mistake, but there's still room for me to grow, especially if it's a mistake that's more devastating. Thinking about, I am not that mistake. I can still learn from this, even if it seems like there's nowhere to learn. And that's the mindset that the TV character I talked about who accidentally set that apartment on fire, that's the mindset he was in. He felt like this is it, this defines everything about me, even though he'd done a lot of good before and after that. But he just couldn't move past that mistake and it kept him down. Something I don't hear talked about as much as what our mindset is like when we make mistakes is how our body feels when we make mistakes. For example, say you try to open up the wrong car in a parking lot thinking it was yours. Mentally, you might be annoyed that it's not your car and now you have to keep walking around to find where you actually parked. You also might feel embarrassed or nervous in case someone thinks you're trying to steal this car. But what does your body actually do? You might have an increased heart rate and start breathing a bit faster. Maybe you start sweating. You may feel tense or your face turns red if it's an embarrassing mistake, which all of those things I'm pretty sure are different signs of panic. For that example, mentally, you'll probably keep a better eye out on where you park next time or memorize your plate number, which is part of that growth mindset of, okay, I don't want to keep making this mistake again. So let me just make sure I pay more attention. On the other side, if that is your mindset, your body might suddenly feel calmer, your shoulders are looser, and you're breathing a little lighter. Making mistakes is part of being human. Sometimes we make the same mistakes over and over, but I am trying to reframe my mistakes. I'm trying to really observe what my mindset is at the time of making a certain mistake. How does my body feel? How am I going to move from this? Although mistakes can suck, sometimes you make a mistake that actually turns out for the better. So I don't want to forget that part. But mistakes can help us in a few different ways. Mistake help adults develop and retain our emotional resilience because the truth is that life is not always a walk in the park, especially for many people. So having that emotional resilience is really important. A mistake can make us more self-aware when we're able to analyze that mistake with that growth mindset. It can also help to build our problem-solving skills. In the example I gave about not remembering where you parked your car, maybe the learning from that is to download a certain app that tracks where your car is, or whenever you get out of your car in a big parking lot, take a picture of where you parked it or write down the number where you parked it. That is a problem solving skill that you learn by having made that mistake. Because hindsight is 2020, sometimes we make mistakes because we didn't learn something or it's something that we didn't know. So the next time we'll be more informed. When those types of mistakes happen to me, it helps me improve my decision making in the future. It's good to acknowledge our mistakes. You don't need to acknowledge it to other people, but as we get older, it's good to acknowledge our mistakes and not just try to brush them under the rug. Of course, there are probably mistakes that we've all made that we won't forget about. I encourage you to try not to ruminate or dwell on those mistakes because then you get stuck thinking about what you've done wrong, which could lead to more mistakes. And that also takes away from you learning from that mistake if you are unable to move on. I encourage us all as adults, I'm definitely working on this, to try to look at mistakes as an area of opportunity, either not to do that again or change something for the better instead of a setback. And a quote that pretty much sums up what I'm trying to get across is by Henry Ford, the person who founded Ford Motor Company and the assembly line. He said, "The only real mistake is the one from which we learn nothing." Two questions I want to leave you with. How do you typically feel emotionally and physically in the moment that you make a mistake? And what, if anything, do you do to move past it and learn from it? I'll have a special guest for next week's episode, so make sure to tune in. Thanks for listening to Lush Life No Labels. Like and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. I'd love to hear from you guys on what you think about this podcast. Cheers to your lush life and see you later.